What's up, everybody? The Real Screeners are back. I'm Humberto.
And I'm Lenny.
And we are here today to bring you our top 5 movie trilogies of all time. You know, a lot of sequels have been coming out lately, a lot of Marvel sequels, you know, Infinity War recently came out, so we thought, hey, it's due time to bring out a list where we really dig into awesome movie trilogies.
Yeah, and this really wasn't an easy process. At first I thought, oh, okay, I already kind of have my idea of it. But once you start paying attention to all the good trilogies out there, a lot of problems prop up. Like, are you going to consider a trilogy that had a 4th movie 15 years down the road? Or how about this trilogy? It was really good up until the last one, so...
I thought this was going to be easier.
Yeah, we did our best.
But this was tough, man, especially, you know, when you have a series of films that have a 4th or a 5th installment. Should we count those as trilogies? Because we only really like the first 3 anyway.
Right, the 4th one doesn't count.
Yeah, and then, you know, you have some trilogies where only the first film is really solid, but then the sequels are not that strong. Right. So, you know, there were some challenges to be sure. Okay. But, you know, let's get right into it. Right.
So number 5 on my list was Toy Story. It's a beloved movie. I love the fact that it had such lovable characters. Yeah, it's not maybe a movie you would think about as having like one of the greatest trilogies of all time, but the worst movie out of that trilogy got a 99 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow. Okay. Yep. Well, I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I mean, God, talk about like movie nostalgia, right? I mean, the original Toy Story, I believe, came out back in like 95, I want to say. And there are some iconic images, just like that last race. Do you remember when they're trying to rescue Buzz Lightyear?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, and then my favorite line of the whole trilogy is, he said, "That's not flying, that's falling with style."
Wow, I'm surprised. I'm surprised that you picked Toy Story as one of your top 5 trilogies.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And it wasn't just because of the Rotten Tomatoes ratings. I mean, I wasn't a child, but I was still kind of young enough to appreciate it. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And, you know, Pixar and Disney has been putting out some amazing films, and I think that this is by far their best. I don't know that they have any other trilogies. I know that there's Incredibles 2 coming out, but right. Yeah, this is a solid choice, man.
So what about you? What was your number 5?
All right, so my number 5 is perhaps a trilogy that a lot of people haven't heard about, but it really resonates a lot with me, and I'm gonna call this the Before trilogy, directed by Richard Linklater, and the first installment came out in '95. It's called Before Sunrise, and then 9 years after that, the second one came out. It's called Before Sunset in 2004, and the third one came out in 2014. There's a 9-year gap in between each of the films, right? What's great about Before Sunrise is that you have this really organic and like authentic like relationship story. I'm not even going to call it a love story or a romance, because I think that would be a disservice to this movie. It's just an American man, a French woman meet on a train very serendipitously and just have this, you know, and just have this like conversation. And, you know, these movies feel unlike any other movie, you know, you'll ever see, because the entire movie you have Ethan Hawke and you have Julie Delpy, you know, having this conversation, and the entire movie is just the two of them talking about politics, religion, biology, love, sex, I mean, any topic that you can possibly think of. So the movie has some very strong writing. It's just these two characters like becoming very close, very intimate, and the movies take on some really unexpected twists and turns, you know, because relationships in real life are complicated, and what I love about these movies is that it handles relationships the right way. You know, it doesn't feel cheesy, it doesn't feel sappy, it's not a sappy romance movie, it's something very authentic and genuine.
So I should watch it? Because I've never watched these movies.
Oh yeah, well, no, you've got to. Yeah, these are good movies definitely a good trilogy to watch, and it's great to see how the actors like grow from each of the movies. And just like there's a 9-year gap in between the movies, there's also a 9-year gap in each of the storylines as well.
Okay.
So it's like you're seeing the story progress just like with the progression of the movie. So anyway, that's my number 5. Check it out. Richard Linklater, awesome film.
Okay. All right. We'll stick with you. And what was your number 4?
So my number 4 is the Dark Knight trilogy.
Okay.
All right. So this is, again, a rare example like the Before trilogy that I was talking about earlier, where I feel every single installment in this trilogy is a strong entry, you know? Every single one. Batman Begins, great. Of course, you have The Dark Knight, which is probably the most popular, the most talked about, the darker entry in the series. And then you have Rises, which nicely picks up where number 1 left off, continuing the Ra's al Ghul, you know, storyline and all of that. And I just think that Christopher Nolan has top-notch directing, editing, special effects. Of course, the cast in all of the movies is top-notch. From Gary Oldman to Michael Caine to Morgan Freeman. Of course, Christian Bale plays the most tortured and conflicted Batman, the best portrayal of Batman in any Batman movie.
I agree with that.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you could say so many things. The themes are very well developed. The themes of annihilation, of course, is something prevalent throughout the entire trilogy as a form of like purification. And
right.
Yeah,
even with Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
You know, you see that in Dark Knight Rises, you know, he is torn down and he is to an extent annihilated.
Yeah, and I think that The Dark Knight Rises doesn't get as much accolades as it should, because I think that you really get to see, you know, Bruce Wayne at his lowest point and how he has this, you know, strong mental and physical threat that he has to really like work to surpass,
right.
You know?
And going back to your point on The Dark Knight Rises, of course it's not going to get as many, I guess as much popularity behind it, because it's having to follow the act of The Dark Knight, which obviously is anchored by Heath Ledger's Joker performance.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
but yeah, like you said,
that's the highlight of Dark Knight.
Yeah, like you said, all three installments were fantastic. I especially liked, like you said, going back to Christian Bale and his story arc, his character arc, excuse me. That's really good storytelling when you can go beyond the plot and really show a character that's changing and very dynamic throughout a trilogy. That's when you're gonna have solid gold.
Absolutely, yeah. I love those movies. So, what about your number 4, man?
So my number 4 happens to be the Dark Knight trilogy, which we just talked about, and it was not planned.
Fantastic.
Like minds think alike sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seemed like a good place to put these movies in, you know.
Yeah.
I really, you know that Batman Begins was my number 1 comic movie, superhero movie of all time, and so I knew that it had to be in my top 5, and I wrestled as to where to put it, but number 4.
Yeah, speaking of wrestling, let's go to number 3 actually.
Sure.
I wrestled with number 3 versus number 4, where to put the Dark Knight, and at the end of the day, I decided my number 3 instead would be the Godfather trilogy.
Wow. Okay. Yep. Okay.
So I'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so a lot of people will hinge the Godfather trilogy on the first 2 parts, and understandably so, because the last one took a totally different direction. A lot of famous actors chose not to be in that movie, and so it just didn't have that same feel, that same aura, that energy that the first 2 had.
Right. I mean, I think that the first 2 are definitely some of the best American films ever made.
Right, and so that's why it reaches my number 3.
Yeah.
Because again, we talk about character development and how crucial that is, and you know, Coppola really knew what he was doing, and so Michael Corleone is masterfully crafted. He's masterfully crafted. Like macaroni. Yeah, so in the first 2 movies, so that's why I catapulted it to number 3.
Yeah, Michael's character arc throughout all 3 films is very well done, I think. And I think that number 3, yeah, I think that number 3 really is a satisfying finale as far as Michael's storyline is concerned. I think the main issues with number 3 is that the storytelling, there was some weird decisions with like the fate of his children, and then of course, you know, Sofia Coppola playing his daughter's role. Well, it was such an important role for the movie. It was such an important character, and to throw someone who was such a novice into that role was not the wisest decision, but she's a great director. I mean, she definitely is a better director than she is an actress. But my favorite thing about the Godfather movies, Lenny, is the way in which it makes the viewers conflicted between loving and despising this like Italian American mafia, you know, because Coppola does such an excellent job of making you care about them because they act like any other family, you know, like they celebrate, they have their traditions, they love each other, they demand respect, you know, and they have like these principles, but then they forsake them when they turn around and kill people. And, you know, do these ridiculous things.
It's like being a vigilante in a way, because sometimes they do things for the right principle, but in dark ways.
Absolutely.
So like I said, conflicted, and I think it's a fantastic point to bring up.
I love
it's so engaging.
And one more thing I've got to say about Godfather, because I love this trilogy, is Marlon Brando as Vito, but equally good and nuanced is Robert De Niro as Vito, as the younger Vito in Godfather Part 2. And the way that they juxtapose that storyline between Michael Corleone and Vito, giving you like the differences and how they rise to power in the 20s and 50s, I believe, is just, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
It's a beautiful parallel.
Doesn't get any better than that.
He knew what he was doing.
All right, so cool.
Your number 3?
My number 3 is the original Star Wars trilogy, starting with
number 3.
Yeah, my number 3.
Not even a runner-up.
It's not my number 2, and it's not my number 1.
I'm done.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.
See ya, everybody.
All right. Let's humor you. All right.
So yeah, my number 3 is the original Star Wars trilogy, starting with A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. 77 through 83, I believe, is when Return of the Jedi was released. I'm going to start with saying that it doesn't get any better than watching Mark Hamill standing on Tatooine, looking out at the two suns, kind of brooding and yearning for like that brighter and more exciting future. Like when I think of movie images and scenes in movies, that scene almost brings a tear to my eye, man. It's like,
it wasn't Jar Jar Binks? No?
Jar Jar Binks, kiss my butt, you know? No.
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
I mean, Empire Strikes Back is my favorite in the trilogy, and I know what your favorite is, but I think you'll talk about that maybe later. So anyway, Empire Strikes Back, I think, is the darkest in the entry. It has the nice big reveal at the end, and you got, you know, all these kind of stories going on at the same time. You have that blossoming romance between Han and Leia. You have, you know, Luke being trained by Yoda, which is probably my favorite part of that movie. And then you have Lando, you have Boba Fett, you have Darth Vader. There's a lot going on. And but I love that trilogy. I think it's so embedded into our collective consciousness, of course, so we can talk about it with so many people and share in just one of the greatest science fiction trilogies of all time.
Okay.
Basically.
All right. I will talk about that momentarily.
Yes, I know you will.
So let's jump to my number 2.
Go ahead.
Which is, I'm sure a lot of you probably expect it by now, it's the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Oh, Lord!
Yep. Oh, Lord, yes. Of course. You're talking about a movie that some people, first of all, they debate as to whether it's even a trilogy because it's like one long movie, right?
It does feel like a mini-series. It does feel like a mini-series, yeah.
But it is epic, okay? Besides the fact that it got nominated and won all these Academy Awards, they did such a really good job of taking you out of the real world and putting you in this fantasy world and all these different types of races and species of creatures and stuff.
And the mythology that is created, right? And the spectacle and the grandeur and the locations shot in New Zealand are beautiful.
There's so many things you can talk about with this franchise.
Oh man, and not a single performance in that trilogy, to me, Lenny, not a single performance feels wrong.
That's right.
Not a single one. Some people complained about Frodo being such a weakling, and you know, Sam having the more of the courage, but I mean, it's faithful to the book by Tolkien, and so Kate Blanchett and all of these wonderful actors, Christopher Lee, you know, just make this a great trilogy. Yeah.
Right. There's a reason why, even though it's forever long, that people will watch it over and over.
Do you have a preference as to like which is your favorite in the trilogy?
I would say The Return of the King was my favorite.
Okay.
You know, because I'm a very climactic kind of guy. Okay. And so I liked everything coming together in that movie.
That's funny. My favorite has always been the Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay.
I think that I think that the reason I like it is because it's not so heavy on battles. It's more like, I guess, mystical and mysterious in a way.
And you like a lot of that exposition and backstory development.
Backstory, yeah.
So I can totally understand that. Yep.
Yeah.
They're all three fantastic.
Okay.
Number 2.
So my number 2, Lenny, is the Godfather trilogy.
Okay. I thought that would be your number 1.
No, it's not. It's not my number 1. My number 2 is the Godfather trilogy. I thought long and hard about that, and I know that you're thinking, how can you put that over Star Wars trilogy? But when it comes to those movies, man, they're just such a representation of like what American movies are all about. The importance of family, you know, I think is what kind of comes to mind for me. But yeah, and we already talked a lot about The Godfather. I don't want to keep spewing about it, but the Godfather trilogy is my number 2.
Okay, so sound choice.
Yeah.
Sound choice.
Yeah.
All right, so I think at this time we're going to go ahead and reel off some movies that we really couldn't get in our top 5,
right,
but still deserve some recognition.
Yeah, these are honorable mentions.
So at the top of my list of honorable mentions, which would effectively probably be like a number 6, is Indiana Jones, which I really, really wanted to get into my top 5. Couldn't do it. I love the fact that it's a Steven Spielberg type film where you have beautiful action set pieces. Also love the fact that it was a novel idea with having an archaeologist go through all these adventures. Okay. The next one on my list is the Dollars trilogy. It's a trilogy I think is often forgotten and overlooked, but when you look back at it, you see that it really is kind of like your archetypal badass Western that I thought really kind of set the stage for Westerns thereafter.
Okay.
Next up, I have the Captain America trilogy. I'm a huge Marvel fan. I loved the second and third Captain America installments. To me, it was a Russo brothers masterpiece in terms of having a beautiful balance of action and characterization. After that, I've got the Back to the Future trilogy. It's a movie that almost anyone can spit iconic lines from, and I thought that it's one of those movies that really kind of set the rules for like your modern time travel movies. And rounding out my list of honorable mentions, I do have Planet of the Apes, and I mean like the current Caesar Planet of the Apes. Andy Serkis was phenomenal. I like the fact that they made this a really engaging conflict in that you look at it and you say, well, I can kind of sympathize with the apes. So to me, those are my honorable mentions.
Wow. Okay. Those are some pretty solid choices. Going on with my honorable mentions at number 6, Lenny, I also had the Indiana Jones trilogy.
All right, you chose wisely.
I really wish I could have put this in my top 5, but ultimately, I just thought that my other, higher choices had stronger films throughout. But Steven Spielberg is at his best with Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's just the pinnacle of all like action, adventure, treasure hunting, adventure yarns,
Spelunking.
Yeah, everything. And the second film takes that little like more comedic turn with like the relationship he has with like Short Round and Willie, and then that chemistry with Sean Connery in Last Crusade is unrivaled.
Right.
Going on with my number 7 is the current Planet of the Apes trilogy, which you had, I believe, as your
Excellent choice. My number 10.
Yeah, your number 10. Yeah, I think that I was surprised at how high I had this on my list of movies. But ultimately what it came down to was that I really liked how I loved each movie in the entry more and more. I think that the movies became more like politically motivated as they went on, you know, talking about, you know, peace and war and prejudice and all of these deep, like, societal conflicts going on, of course, between the humans and the apes.
Yeah, it can be seen as being very metaphoric.
Yeah, it is a metaphor for our times, I think. And again, Andy Serkis with his motion capture performance.
Right, anything he touches is gold.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so my number 8 on my list is the Back to the Future trilogy.
Yes.
Yes, man.
Dun, dun, dun. Oh, we're so way off.
No, that.
No, we're both okay. Whatever.
Okay,
we're at different times.
Anyway, you know, Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, great chemistry. You know, you have the older, mad, crazy scientist and the young teenage, you know, boy, and every movie feels different. You know, I like how the second installment takes place in the future, which, by the way, has a weird, like, take on 2015. You know, like flying cars and hoverboards and instant pizza makers. Like, what the heck? Yeah, and then the third one is a Western, and but by far the best one is the first one, you know, and it's a great nostalgic movie, like great, you know, songs from both the 50s and the 80s. Golden trilogy. My number 9 is the Evil Dead trilogy.
I almost had that in mind, yes.
There's a soft spot in me for horror films, and there's an even bigger soft spot, I think, when they combine horror with comedy. I just love that combination. And the best movie in this series for me is Evil Dead 2, which is a great. It has to be the greatest, like, horror slash comedy.
Really nice balance.
Yeah, it has some really laugh out loud moments. I love the cheesy, you know, claymation. I love Bruce Campbell in this role, even though it's kind of crazy and exaggerated.
That's what we love about it, though.
Yeah, it's like B-movie horror fun at its best. So I love those movies. And then finally, in my number 10 is the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy, and I'm talking about, of course, the Swedish films. The second one, I think, is The Girl Who Played with Fire, and then the last one is The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, or something like that. But if you're looking for a solid, like, detective movie, murder mystery movie that has a lot of, like, grit and attitude and a very, like, idiosyncratic, like, female lead, and, you know, it's very noirish, this is the movie to watch. This is a trilogy to watch. It has a lot of attitude, based on the novels by Stieg Larsson, and again, a great trilogy from beginning to end.
Okay, excellent choices. With that, let's wait no longer. Down to our number 1 picks.
Drum roll, please.
My number 1 is no surprise. It is the only number 1 that anyone should have.
Can I guess it? Can I guess it?
You'll never guess it.
I will guess it. It's the original Star Wars
trilogy. No, it's a Spider-Man trilogy. Psych. No, it's Star Wars.
That's what I thought.
It's just, how could you not have Star Wars atop the mountaintop? This is a trilogy that not only had groundbreaking effects and basically was the standard for all sci-fi films. There are still movies being, you know, that are imitating it these days.
I'll give you that. Absolutely.
You also, the number 1 thing about Star Wars is that it has really embedded itself in our culture, or as you would say, our collective's
consciousness. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, TV show that it inspired, all the spin-offs it inspired, all the sequels and prequels it inspired.
Oh my goodness, all the novels, all the audio.
It's amazing that since 1977 we're still talking our heads about Star Wars, you know? I mean, yeah, I get it. I understand why you would pick it as number 1.
Yeah, and I mean, I won't go too much into the details as to what makes it fantastic, because I think you mentioned a lot of them earlier. But really, it's that Luke Skywalker character arc that takes you from A New Hope all the way through Return of the Jedi. You see a kid going from this wide-eyed, you know, starry-eyed youth into a guy who is ready to take his place among the Jedi greats.
That's right.
And then, of course, you have Harrison Ford, you have Princess Leia, you have all these other great actors and actresses.
And you have John Williams' incredible score.
Oh, yes, yes.
Probably the most recognizable musical score in history, I mean, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And John Williams, he's everywhere. What hasn't John Williams done that isn't magical? I mean, aside from Star Wars, you have Schindler's List, you have Saving Private Ryan, Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, basically
E.T.
Yeah, any Steven Spielberg
The list goes
movie.
on, and I believe he has been nominated for an Oscar 50 times.
Wow. Yeah,
something
enough for
around
2 lifetimes.
something around the, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm gonna stop there with Star Wars. I think we all know why it's the best, the greatest of all time.
You can probably guess what my number 1 is, Lenny, right?
I'm gonna guess that obviously it is the original X-Men trilogy, especially X3. Okay, my bad. It's the Silence of the Lambs trilogy.
Nope. It's the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Of course.
Yeah. What else is there, right?
I mean, you know, you had some really good arguments about Star Wars being number 1, and The Godfather, to me, you know, story-wise and script-wise, kind of beats out the Star Wars movies, although Star Wars broke so many boundaries when it comes to technical achievements. But The Lord of the Rings is just a crowning technical achievement. I mean, that last film received, you know, Oscars for editing, for cinematography, for sound, for music, for just every technical aspect is just so well done in all 3 of those movies.
That's why it's my favorite.
You know, and it's done on such an epic scale that, like you said earlier, it does feel like it's one big long movie, you know, and I love that about it. And I love that every character shines, every character gets its grand moment, you know. And, you know, we talked quite a bit about it when you had it mentioned earlier in your top 5, but a couple of other things that I think are some highlights for these movies is just Peter Jackson's touch. There's a couple of movies that he made, Dead Alive, which is like this really campy, gory horror show, and there's another one called The Frighteners with Michael J. Fox, which is kind of like a horror comedy. But anyway, my point is that I loved how he kind of incorporated some horror elements into Lord of the Rings, particularly with the orcs and the Uruk-hai, and how he made them so grotesque and unappealing, you know.
I like the fact that he didn't lean too much, not too much on CGI. There are some CGI elements there, but it's not like it overtakes a lot of the film.
Yeah, and you know, some of the CGI is kind of like a little dated, like the Ents, you know, those trees in the second movie. You know, they look kind of, I don't know, disproportionate in comparison to some of the human actors. But of course, to me, one of the biggest, most impressive details about this trilogy is, of course, the character of Gollum, played by Andy Serkis.
Oh, yes.
This was like the beginning of motion capture, and the way that he... this is probably, to me, the most interesting character in the movie, because he's so horrifying, but so comedic at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
And so conflicted. But anyway, Lord of the Rings, those are just movies that I could literally just pop in and just sit back, relax, and enjoy them from beginning to end. And
I can't argue with you on that one. Yeah, that's a very solid pick. One last thing about Star Wars is, you know, we've seen the effect it's had on our society, our culture, actually, right?
Yeah.
With the greatness of the Lord of the Rings, I don't quite see that effect, and that's why I catapulted Star Wars ahead of it. That's all.
Well, Lord of the Rings is better storytelling. That's all.
Okay, agree to disagree. Okay, so that's our top 5 of the greatest trilogies of all time, guys. Let us know in the comments, as always, what you think, if you agreed or disagreed with some of our choices.
Absolutely. Please let us know what you think are your favorite trilogies of all time, or if there's anything we missed or forgot.
Okay, and as always, if you like our videos, feel free to subscribe and hit that bell. We'll make sure we get you notifications. And lastly, let's plug that Stardust.
That's right. Remember to follow us, me at Beto Cuckoo.
And I am at LJ5625.
Thank you very much for tuning in.
All right, we'll see you later. Okay.
And so this is a trilogy directed by Richard
Ligner, or Richard.
my number 3 is